Hello, I'm Carl Brown, and today we're talking about how to use 7 questions to help create a dialogue about evaluating a movie, or really any piece of literature or story, novel, book. But how to use 7 questions to evaluate a movie in a discussion with our kids in order to teach them virtue. So welcome to this short video. My wife Amy and I started the Glory of Home Life Foundation in order to help people experience the peace, providence, and protection of God through the devotion to the 7 Sorrows of Mary. And you can find us at gloryofhomelife.org. And I share with everyone in every video that Kibeho, Rwanda was the site of the most recent major church-approved apparition of our Blessed Mother, and she warned the people of Rwanda about the genocide of 1994, where nearly 1 million people died in less than 3 months, and more than 1 million other people were displaced as refugees, and all of this in a country with a population of 7 million people. Now, Mary gave this warning more than 10 years before the genocide, which she confirmed by raising 3 visionaries from the dead. And the most important thing is that the warning she gave the people of Rwanda, she specifically said this warning was not just for Rwanda, but a warning for the whole world. So what will you do now? Will you pray the rosary every day as she asked, or will you one day regret not having done enough to prevent what she warned us about? So the riddle for today is, and I'll give you the answer to this riddle at the end of this short video. The person who makes it has no need for it. The person who buys it has no use for it. And the person who uses it can neither see nor feel it. What is it? Okay, so that is the riddle for today, and we'll give the answer at the end of this short video. So this video is a template to use when you are watching a movie with your kids. And many times you're better off by watching the movie first, or learning about it before you watch it. But even if you don't, in here at Glory of Home Life, I'm going to share specific movies with the answers to these 7 questions for these movies as a sort of guide and recommendation and really virtue development plan for your kids. So it's very, very straightforward. It's easy. Once you learn this once, you'll never forget it. And it goes like this. First, identify the hero. Identify the protagonist. Second, identify at least 2 values that they have. So values are nouns. What values do they have? They value family, they value country, they value success, they value money. The point of identifying these values is not to make a judgment statement as to whether or not they should value these things. It's just an assessment. What is it that they value? Third, identify the thing that forces them to choose between their values. And thinking back to high school English, there's several themes that can be prevalent in stories, like man versus man, man versus nature. And although those things are valid, but in this case, we're just saying there's an incident that triggers this protagonist to choose between the values that they have. So identify what that is. Is it a death? Is it a calamity? Is it an incident? Whatever. Fourth, identify the sacrifice that the protagonist, that the hero must make to protect the most important value. Fifth, identify the main virtue that the protagonist demonstrated. Sixth, identify what the protagonist gained. And then seventh, ask yourself if it was worth it. Would you make that sacrifice? Is this protagonist admirable? And parents, ask yourself if this storyline is representative of reality. And if so, explain it to your kids. And if not, explain why not. So Let me review those 7 things again, and then we're going to apply it in a couple of cases. First, identify the protagonist. Second, identify at least 2 values that they have, and then rank them. Third, identify the thing that forces them to choose between their values. Fourth, identify the sacrifice they must make to protect their most important value. Fifth, identify the main virtue that they demonstrate. Sixth, identify what they gained. And then seventh, ask yourself if it was worth it. So I'm going to use this with a movie that most of us are going to be very familiar with. So start out with Star Wars from 1977. This is the Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, the first movie that was made, so episode 4. So who is the protagonist? And the answer is Luke Skywalker. What does Luke Skywalker value at the beginning of the movie? At the beginning of the movie, he values family, right? He's obedient to his uncle. He's dutiful in his work. But he also values justice. And he sees this message from Princess Leia, and he wants to go and help her. He wants to right a wrong. So his values are family and justice. And the sense of duty to his family holds him back from helping to rescue this princess. And he's looking, kind of sadly at the 2 suns as they're setting, thinking, I've got to stay here with my family, but I wish I could go and rescue this princess. So the next question then is, what is the thing that forces him to choose between the 2 values? And that is the death of the family, right? Because he's got this droid that these other creatures wanted, the Jawas, and the stormtroopers track down. They want to track down and destroy the droid. So, and they kill his family. So the death of his family is the triggering incident that forces him to reorder the values that he has. Whereas first his value was family and duty on the farm, and then secondly he valued justice. But now that the death of his uncle has sort of given him permission to move on. So then what does he sacrifice in order to protect the most important value, which is justice? Is that he's willing to give up life on Tatooine. And then we ask the question, what is the main virtue that the protagonist demonstrates? And the answer is fortitude. He is willing to endure difficulty in order to help rescue this princess. And that happens before they go off and train to destroy the Death Star. But it's those are the things that set in motion him eventually coming in and destroying the Death Star. So what does he gain? And the answer is that the defeat of the Empire, right? He blows up the Death Star. He rescues the princess, first of all, but he blows up the Death Star, and in so doing, they've stopped this evil enemy, right? So the 7th question is it worth it? And as someone who's watching the movie, we can say, well, yeah, that was worth it. He didn't have much to give up after all. His family had been killed in Tatooine, so he went off and did this. So we can say, oh yeah, it was worth it. But the movie maker, right, George Lucas, clearly thinks it's worth it because of the celebration at the end, and he's given a medal. He's awarded an honor. So it's important to make a distinction there. By the way, is it worth it? Do you think it's worth it? And does the movie maker portray it as something that's worth it? And there are times when, as parents, we may have to say, look, the movie maker is making it seem as though this is worth it, but it's not really, right? And that can come about in a movie like where people are robbing a bank or something like that. So there, I've walked you through these 7 questions for a movie that most are familiar with, and that's Star Wars. But that's a template that can be applied to any movie. Identify the protagonist, identify at least 2 values that they have, and then rank them. Identify the thing, the event, the person that forces them to choose and reorder their values, choose between it and reorder their values. Then identify the sacrifice they must make to protect their most important value. Then identify the main virtue that the protagonist demonstrated. Identify what the protagonist gained, and then ask yourself if it was worth it. So I think you'll be able to see these 7 questions are easy to answer. It's easy to walk through. It certainly takes less time than it takes to watch the movie. And it's really worth it to have this conversation with your children about any movie that you watch. But it's especially beneficial to go through methodically and say, we're going to watch a movie together. Sometimes it's worth assessing the overall story separate from the framework we've introduced with some basic substitutions, just to see if the overall story, the overall message, the overall meaning is consistent with a Christian worldview. And here I want to give an example. There's an animated movie called The Croods, and it's an animated movie about a cave-dwelling family. And I watched this with my kids, and I did research the movie from the standpoint of, is it going to be clean and wholesome or whatever? And it passed that smell test, and so I was like, okay, well, we can watch this movie. Well, then we watched the movie, and I was really disappointed, and I'll share with you why. The overall storyline, if you haven't seen the movie, it goes like this. A girl disobeys a direct command from her dad. He says, do not leave the cave at night. This girl disobeys that command, and all these things ensue in the movie. And as a result, her whole family inherits a beautiful garden, and they escape death, and their cave was destroyed. So, a girl disobeys a direct command from her dad, and in so doing, she inherits a paradise for her whole family. So can you see how this is directly at odds with the central message about the fall from Genesis 1 through 3? In Genesis, in the story of creation with Adam and Eve, Eve disobeys a direct command from God and loses paradise and inherits death for herself and all of her offspring. But the Croods, the message is completely the opposite. And it really is subtly endorsing that disobedience. So once I shared that with my kids, I remember my daughter said, oh, you ruined the movie for me. Well, the movie ruined the message of the fall, right? That we should obey. Obedience is good. Obeying God can never lead us in the wrong direction. So there we go. We stepped back from a movie. We assessed the overall message very briefly, very simply, and boiled it down to 2 things. Girl disobeys a direct command from her dad. As a result, she inherits paradise. That's much simpler than the 7-step method that I shared with you about Star Wars. But you don't have to do just one or the other. You can always use both of those frames of reference, but you should always favor the 7-step method, because the overall message can sometimes be really subtle, and it can be elusive. But when you go through this 7-step process of saying who's the protagonist, what values do they have, what forces them to reorder those values, what virtue do they have to demonstrate, that starts to show unequivocally what a virtue is, what a value is, and it helps us to then assess, was practicing this virtue or making this sacrifice worth it. So I recommend that you always stick with that 7-question sample. So I want to give another quick little example of looking at this, a really quick overview like I did with the Croods, and that is from Despicable Me as a movie spun off a movie about the Minions, and I think it's called Minions. And they introduce at the very beginning of the movie the origin of these minions. So I want to look at that spin-off and the origin of these minions briefly and at a really high level. Okay, here's what we're told about these minions. They are creatures who existed before human beings. That's one. And they're devoted to following the worst kind of bad guy possible. They always are looking for the most powerful bad guy. Now, this says nothing about the story of the movie Minions or the plot. This isn't evaluating their actions or deciding if something was worth it. This is just an assessment. This is what we're told, and then we're just kind of reflecting on that. These are creatures who existed before human beings, who devoted themselves to following the worst bad guy they could find. So, in reality, because Minions is an animated, it's an animated movie and it's completely make-believe. It's not based in reality. There's no such things as minions. But in the real world, what can we see that is a parallel? What creatures existed before human beings who were devoted to following the worst kind of bad guy possible? And the answer is fallen angels. So while this doesn't make the movie Despicable Me a bad movie, it should make us reevaluate how we view the creatures called minions. Okay? So I've used this high-level assessment both for a movie line with the Croods, but also for a type of character with the Minions. And you should become acquainted with evaluating movies at a high level like this, in addition to that 7-question framework. So another example, and this just shows not the progress, but the opposite of progress in movie messages. There was a popular movie, a musical, many years ago called The Music Man. And I want to contrast that with a more recent movie called The Bridges of Madison County. In The Music Man, there's a guy who's a swindler, who's a cheat, who's a liar, who's a con artist, and he goes to this small town in order to deceive them, but he's so taken with the librarian that it changes him completely, and he follows through on what were empty promises before. So we have this man who's a con man, who's inspired and changes everything for the good. Contrast that with the movie Bridges of Madison County, and you've got a guy who is clearly degenerate, right? A low-life, self-centered individual who comes in and he perverts a good woman. And he has an affair with her that's illicit, that is then kept quiet the rest of the life of that woman character, and that she sort of romanticizes this relationship that she had with this ne'er-do-well, right? So this guy comes in and he spoils somebody who is an upstanding, otherwise an upstanding character. And you see how these two main messages are completely opposite. So I share that with you in order to show a comparison from movie to movie. We did that a little bit with Croods, but there we're comparing the message of Croods with the reality of the fall with Adam and Eve. But it's good also to look at themes in contrast and comparison of two movies or two storylines or two types of characters. And for example, it's useful to point out to your kids that although the overall storyline of Star Wars is a story of redemption, right? The overall storyline is that you've got a character who's Anakin, who becomes Darth Vader, but he is the one who restores balance to the Force and the universe by killing the Emperor, right? But that story of redemption, when it's told in the sequence that the movies came out, reverses the redemption and makes it a story of a fall. So we see episode 4, then 5, then 6, then episodes 1, 2, and 3. So what we see is this guy who ends up doing good, but in the sequence of what we're told about him doing good, and then we're told about him becoming bad. So it leaves our culture with the impression of the opposite of redemption. So it's important to see those distinctions because movies, TV shows, stories can animate us and they can be used against us. So I really encourage you to use this 7-question framework with your kids. Here on this site, you're going to find me applying this 7-question framework to movies that you can use with your kids as a discussion guide and an analysis for them. And here's the great thing. Once you start to show your kids or your grandkids this framework, they'll be able to use it independently. And I'm here to tell you from experience, it doesn't take much repetition for them to totally get it. But without showing them this framework, they are ill-equipped to really assess the message of a movie. And they become vulnerable to however the movie maker or storyteller wants to present it. So this is a skill set that you can teach to your children or grandchildren. It's very simple, and it's something that you can do by spending time together. And watching movies isn't the best way to create memories, but you can use it for a good opportunity. You can create memories around those movies. And for our family, we like to quote movies in different situations, and that makes those movies last longer, and they make those movies become a part of our family life. So movies are a great resource for families, and this framework can help put those movies at your service rather than making you and your children becoming a subservient audience to the message that the filmmaker wants to put into their minds. So that is all for this video, but I want to go back and answer the riddle for you. So the person who makes it has no need for it. The person who buys it has no use for it. And the person who uses it can neither see nor feel it. What is it? And the answer is a casket. I'm Carl Brown. My wife, Amy, and I started the Glory of Home Life Foundation in order to help people experience the peace, providence, and protection of God through the devotion to the 7 Sorrows of Mary. God bless you. Have a great day.